Hi, Omar. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having a follow up conversation with us. I am really excited about talking to you in no small part because after we recorded our episode together, I've been seeing you a lot recently in my TikTok and Instagram feeds because you've been up to a lot since we talked last. Do you mind giving kind of a quick recap of what's been going on in your life?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think when we talked, it was January of 2024 or thereabouts. And so
Thereabouts.
it's been about a year and a half. At the time when you and I spoke, I was working on a book. That book has since come out. It came out in early February in the UK and Ireland and late February in North America. And basically, about 4.5 of the last 6 months I've spent on the road. Just
Yeah.
doing various book tours, and we've sold it in other regions as well, and so I
Cool.
ended up doing a lot of travel until I kind of burned out completely, and now I'm back home. But the book came out, it got an okay reception. It certainly sort of generated the most extreme and polarized responses of anything I've ever written, which I suppose shouldn't come as that much of a surprise, but I get a lot of this book changed my life, and I get a lot of this is the worst thing I've ever read, and I get very little in between, which is a weird place to be. But
Yeah,
basically,
that's wild.
that's been sort of my professional life for pretty well all of this year.
Yeah. So the title of your book is Someday We Will Have All Been Against This? Or
One
did I
day
get that slightly
everyone will
wrong?
have always been against this.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, One thing that I thought was really interesting as I've been editing the podcast since that book came out, and you say that sentence in as we're talking about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. Um, and so I'm very curious about like where were you in the stage of that book when we were talking in January of 2024?
I was furiously writing away, and I was not that far removed from having a full first draft, I believe.
Wow.
I don't usually write that way. I'm a very slow writer. There's lots of days where I have negative word count, where I sort of just delete the stuff I wrote the day before. And this wasn't that.
Yeah.
This I was writing from a place of deep, deep anger, and I was writing quite furiously. I was doing more every day than I usually do. I'm also one of those people who, my acceleration is horrible, but I have a pretty good top speed, and so I need
Yeah.
that kind of runway. And this wasn't that either. It was every day, regardless of what else was going on in my life, I was finding time to sit down and write. Um,
Wow.
and so the entire process was very, very different. And for, I think about a month after I'd spoken to you was when there was something like a completed draft.
Amazing. Did you always know what the title was going to be, or was that more of a
Yeah.
thesis that you were working with?
No, the original title was The Glass Coffin. I was thinking about this idea that when there's a great injustice happening and when there's this immense asymmetry of privilege,
Yeah.
one of the most offensive things that those without privilege can do in the eyes of those who are privileged is just show the body for what it is.
Yes.
You're not just expected to sort of suffer, you're expected to be invisible while you do. And so that was the original title, and it was only actually, I think, around the time that I spoke to you, that one of my editors said, that tweet you put out, I put out that tweet, like months earlier, where I said, one day when there's no downside, when there's no personal cost, everyone will have always been against this. And she said, you should repurpose that. And as soon as she said it, it made perfect sense. So I'm deeply grateful to her.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a bar. Like, it it definitely resonates. Even if you slightly misquote it, I still think that it's pretty incredible.
Oh, it gets slightly misquoted all of the time. It gets slightly misquoted more than it gets not misquoted.
That, precise language is hard.
Also, like, you put a title that's, 9 words long, I think. That's fair game. I feel at that point it's not anybody's fault.
Thanks. I did somewhat recently, I had to talk on an author being like, hey, you've written a long poetic sentence for this title. Like, can we please just, like, take the actual meat of it and have that be the title? And yes, I see the value in both. It was also not a hill I was going to die on. I was just like, as a suggestion.
I mean, not to get super nerdy, but I am very much on team's short titles. My first 2 novels were 2 words, 3 words, and this one I'm working on now is 1 word. And so this is an anomaly for me.
Fair. I'm glad to know that the record is clear. Yeah. Okay. So I've been seeing you a lot on my social media. Your process for writing this book was really different than what typically happens. Do you mind just kind of diving in? It's also a topic that I care about a lot too. Like, what do you think was really driving you to make this book, and what do you think, for the people who are really in love with this book, what do you think they attach themselves to?
I mean, to answer the first part of that question, I think what was driving me was a number of things. One is, and I don't really know whether your listeners are going to agree with this, and to be quite honest, I don't care. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything, but
okay.
For me, what is happening in Gaza right now is the worst thing I have seen in my lifetime. Not only for the scale of the grotesqueness, not only for the scale of the horror, but for the very obvious intent. And the fact that this is my tax dollars that are paying for this. This is me doing this. Yeah. And I'm being told by all these people who are supposed to represent me that this is actually a good thing and needs to continue. And I think a combination of these things put me in a place where, I'm not good at much of anything. I know how to write, and that's about it. Yeah. And if I can't write about the one thing that, A, I can't stop thinking about, but B, has come to define the world as far as I'm concerned, in terms of whether we have anything resembling actual principles, or norms, or human rights, or equal justice, or any of that good stuff. If I can't write about that, then fine, but I can't keep calling myself a writer. Mm-hmm. And so there was an element of complicity and an element of shame and an element of the self-serving, if I'm being quite honest. Yeah. When we're on the other side of this, and we will be on the other side of this one day, I want to at least say that I did the bare minimum, which was to bear witness. Yeah. And so that was certainly a part of it. And I'm not saying that as a good or bad thing, it's just the reality of the matter.
Right.
I think that the reason it has resonated as much as it has, and I can't deny that it has resonated, I don't think that has anything to do with this being a good book. I think it has everything to do with this moment making a lot of people feel like they are losing their minds. Precisely for that reason I spoke about earlier, this notion that you are watching the worst things human beings can do to one another, and you are being told that if you oppose this in any way, you're the bad guy. And so I think for a lot of people, and certainly this was true when I was on the road, and this would happen at the signing lines and when people would talk to me, this felt like a steam vent of just someone saying, you're not losing your mind, you're not out there on an island. At least someone else feels this way. And I think that's the reason it's connected the way it has. I can't sit here and tell you that it's worth any of your listeners' time or that it's this masterpiece, this deathless classic, or any of that nonsense. I don't think any of that is true. I think there's just an immense vacuum in which it landed. And as the years go by and it becomes safer and safer to do, we're going to see better books about this. But there is something to be said for speaking out now in what little and probably ineffective way I have.
You are so hard on yourself, and you're so humble, and I appreciate that about you.
I think I recently reread my first novel. It was a book called American War that came out the better part of 10 years ago.
Yeah.
or at least I wrote it the better part of 10 years ago, and it was the first time in my life that I read it, and I thought, this isn't that bad. So, it might be the case, like, maybe you're right, maybe I am hard on myself, or this is all humility. I don't care. It's not, I have to live with myself, and so this is just who I am. But yeah. I think with respect to the writing, for this book in particular, I think there's something else going on, because everything just feels so trivial right now.
Yeah.
Everything I do or don't do, or write or don't write, or say in interviews or don't say in interviews, feels so trite. I turn on my computer and it's just images of people starving to death. Again, paid for with my tax dollars. Yeah. And so when I talk about these things, I'm honestly not trying to do the aw shucks routine. And I know that I do that generally with my writing. Like, I do it, and it's disarming and all of that. But in this moment, everything just feels so petty. And the thing I've been telling myself over and over again, just to sort of get through the day, is like, nothing is enough, but everything matters. And so that's the context in which I view this book. It's certainly not a factor of, better tamper expectations so when people pick it up they're pleasantly surprised or what. That's not. I do that for other things, but I don't think I'm doing it.
But not for this. Yeah. No, I've really resonated with everything that you've just been talking about this book and this moment, and like, what do we do as people who are opposed to this genocide, this I don't know. I'm trying to think of like what the political science words for it are. If it's like imperialism, capitalism, Islamophobia, anti-Arab sentiment. Like, it's really it's devastating to watch. It's been devastating to watch for about 2 years now, and yeah, I don't know. Like, the most recent news that I have been getting is that the very little aid that is getting through, people are going to go and try and get, bread, and are getting shot as they're trying to do that. And I don't know, like, I think perhaps my framing on this is wrong, and it is, affected by my positionality, but it is devastating to think about the incredible repression that young people in this country have faced because they tried, like you said, like, nothing is enough but everything matters. Like, the encampment movement, I think, was really powerful, and the amount of repression that those young people faced is unprecedented and deeply disturbing. It's been really interesting to have conversations about Israel and Palestine this time around, as opposed to previous times when atrocities were happening, because I feel like unless you were like an Arab American, you really didn't know about, like, you knew about Israel and Palestine, but you didn't really know the history of Israel and Palestine unless you were learning it in a synagogue, which is usually a Zionist teaching. So the fact that we're having, real human conversations about the injustice is great. And it's how do you live with the fact that we have done more, we have done so much more, and people have sacrificed so much to try and push us towards justice. And here we are a year later from those movements, and the most despicable things that I've ever seen are still happening to people who don't deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me there's sort of 3 layers of oppression or repression, I suppose, inherent in living in this country in this moment.
Yeah.
The first is just the literal actions being taken. You speak out about this, your career is going to be ruined. You're going to be ostracized socially. Your degree is going to be withheld. You're going to be subjected to all manner of brutality, including physical violence. Approved by the very same administrators and universities that are supposed to protect you.
Yeah.
So there's a very real, in some cases, physical cost to this work. But then on top of that, there are more abstract forms of repression. One of them being the repression inherent in obliviousness. We talk about this notion that a lot of people in this part of the world, up until very recently, and maybe still to this day, have the privilege of not being able to point out Palestine on a map, of not caring in the slightest about any of this, without consequence, without any consequence. In fact, the consequence exists once you start caring. So that alone may not be described most of the time as a form of repression, but it absolutely is. It's an imaginative repression. You can't possibly dream up something better than this because you were never invested in the first place, because you never had to be. But then there's a third layer of repression on top of that, which is narrative repression, which is as all of these things are happening, and the news that you are getting is being pre-censored to present a certain version of affairs, that you can watch the sort of middle-of-the-road major news network coverage every night and get a version of reality that has nothing to do with reality. In the middle of all of this, you are continuously asked to adhere to the national narrative that says that this is the freest country on earth, and that you can think whatever you want here and you can say whatever you want, while at the very same time, the consequences for doing exactly that are being presented to you every day. That is a very disorienting place to be. And I think these aren't things that you can sit and wait for them to be dismantled. I think you have to take them on head on, and I think that's what people far braver than me are doing, including these students who have paid an immense price for having a conscience. And just as in every other moment in history just like this, they will be celebrated after the fact.
Yeah.
And it'll be too late.
Yeah. No, I mean, just the trauma that these kids are going through, like, not to mention the fact that there are multiple students whose diplomas have been revoked, like, that upsets their lives. That is, like, it's the kind of punitive stuff that we love to do in this country, but that, when we think about, like, sometimes we think about, oh man, like, at least this person gets their life back after being exonerated. And it's like, yeah, but think about all the things that person lost out on, all of those developmental milestones that they weren't able to live and do in freedom. And, college is hard. I had a hard time in college. The idea that I would work as hard as I did, and some of these kids are went to Columbia, so they worked significantly harder than I did, both phases of school, and to them to then be just derailed in this way, that's hideous. That is such a hideous thing to do to a young person, on top of the fact that they are traumatized. Like, getting beat up by police on your own campus because you were audacious enough to sit there is wild to me.
Yeah, and I think there's been something particularly bitter in the response of these administrations, and I think it has something to do with this notion that there's a sense of betrayal. These kids, I keep calling them kids because they're very, very young relative to how old I am, but these young people have been offered the privilege of not having to care about any of this stuff. And you go and take that and you hand it back in order to stand up for people who can offer you nothing in return. I think there was a sense of real betrayal. Because ahead of anything else, even an academic education, the central priority of all of these institutions should be the protection of these students.
Right.
And to do the exact opposite, I think, will tarnish the legacy of every single human being who engaged in that decision-making process, as it should.
As it should. Yeah, a thing that I just kept trying to talk to people about, made posts, they did not go far on social media, is that when I went to college, I participated in an encampment. We had a different language for it. We called it a sleep-in, but we wanted there to be support for survivors of sexual assault on my campus, DePaul University, and nothing bad happened to us, right? Like, we slept on concrete because we were an urban university. We slept on concrete. We were in tents. Eventually the administration made minor concessions, which they a few years later, when none of us were in that university anymore, then they like backslided on. And then years later, when kids are trying to do the exact same thing that I did, but for Palestine, and in this time when we're all paying attention to Israel and Palestine, they had a completely different response. And it is unconscionable. It is, I just can't imagine, like, the idea that I would be paying so much to be somewhere. Like, you're allowed to be on your own campus. That's the part that it just, like, has never commuted to me of, and, like, I guess, like, that's what repression is that, like, all of these things that we, like, if we are living in a more or less free society, we take for granted. It's just, they can take those things back at any moment, I guess. I guess that is what we are dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this thing that your Canadian listeners might be familiar with, which was these. They used to run them on TV. These like little moments in Canadian history, like important moments in Canadian. They would get actors to act them out, and it was all very very cheesy. But it's like a core memory, I think, for a lot of Canadians, and a lot of them are about these moments where somebody stood up against institutional injustice. You know, moments of deep racism or enshrined racism or sexism. And I think there's something really sort of inherently human about refusing to believe that these moments happen in anything other than hindsight. You know, that was the way they were back then, and we're certainly not like that now. But to think that we're in a moment right now like that requires an entirely different frame of reference. And as with every one of these moments, somebody's going to get their head bashed in trying to fight it. Somebody much braver than I. And that's what has been happening for 2 years. And you can never tell when these moments are coming. I mean, this occupation, this land theft, this degradation and expulsion, in some cases eradication of human beings, has been going on for 3/4 of a century. Yeah. Why now? Why this moment? Well, this moment has come, regardless of what the why is. And so I think for a lot of people, we're programmed to be really, really good on the other side of this moment. Once it's in one of those little history act out things, we're not well trained in being in the middle of it. And so one thing about the title of this book is like, one way or another, I'm going to be proven right or wrong. Like, it's not, we're going to find out one way or the other, but that's generally how I think about moments like this. I think there's this allergic reaction to believing that you might be in the moment of extreme ignorance, that you might be a part of that, and that somebody has to fight to make it something different.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Sorry, no, you apologize a lot. Again, I edited our flagship Hinton episode, and you apologize a lot, being like, "Oh, I ramble, I say this," and like, and that's not what's ever happening in terms of me taking a second to think. It's that like I resonate with so many different points in what you're saying that I need a second to digest and then figure out exactly what I want to say back, because you have it's such a beautiful wave that your thoughts take. I swear I had something. Oh, so I agree with you. It doesn't really matter why we're in this moment, but can I give you my theory of why and have you respond? So I think it's very similar to the Black Lives Matter movement of like when the Black Lives Matter movement was popping off, I was floored. I just, the idea that we would be having a conversation about police brutality and that we were really centering the fact that like Black people dealt with police brutality in a way that white Americans did not. Like, I was like, I wouldn't have believed you like 10 years ago, 2 years ago. I wouldn't have believed that we were capable of that. And what I think the real difference was for that, and I think it's very similar to what's going on in Gaza right now, is everybody is walking around with a camera. Like people were able to record and share their stories and record and share what they saw on their streets. And I think the exact same thing is happening in Gaza. Like, some of my personal heartaches that have come from people dying in Gaza is people sharing their stories and those people dying. And Yeah, so for me, I think that that's a big part of why, is like we were no longer getting information about Israel and Palestine from Israel, like Israel. We were getting it from people who are living and dying in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with a word of that. For me, that's one half of it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure there's lots of people who believe that, you know, cops miraculously started killing black folks right around the same time that the cell phone camera was invented. You know, like I understand that there's something comforting about believing that, even though it has no real relationship to reality. But I think one part of it is exactly what you described. There is now sort of raw evidence of the thing. And, you know, there's a reason that Palestinian journalists are being targeted in the way they are. There's a reason anybody who smuggles out footage is being targeted the way they are. Because I think that's one half of the equation that brings about massive, sometimes cataclysmic change in the form of resistance and protest. But I think there's another half of it. And the other half is the blatant fraudulence of the official message.
Yeah.
Which is to say that both of those need to be in very close proximity to inspire the kind of rage that gets people out into the streets and gets people sort of moving in a way that is very risky to them personally because they feel that strongly. So over the last 2 years, one of the defining memories I'm going to have of this moment is not just the horror that I was watching every single day, but the White House spokespeople who got up to the podium and talked about how much this administration cares about Palestinians, or the whatever propaganda arm of the Israeli government tweeting out happy Ramadan greetings in the middle of this. I think if you just have the fraudulence, it inspires a sense of rage, but there's also an opiate effect to it, where you can just buy into it after a while because you're exhausted, and it makes life so much easier if you just buy into the fraudulence. And if you only have the sort of documentary evidence of the reality, you can be lulled into believing that you can fix this through official channels. If you just sit there and negotiate with the same systems that are responsible for the suppression. But if you have both, then I think it results in something else entirely, which is a complete detachment from the notion that any of this is acceptable, or that any of it can be fought through the same systems that brought this about in the first place. And I think that's the moment we're going through right now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, obviously, I have a great amount of... I deeply detest our current administration, but what has been going on in Gaza has been happening since Biden was in office. And, you know, just to be the person that I am, of like, I felt similar frustration and disgust with the ways that both administrations were handling Israel, Palestine, and the destruction of a people. And yeah, so I guess what's a good question there? I agree and appreciate what you have to say about, like, we can't be using the same systems to dismantle this as you know, as are used to justify and fund this. What do you think are the avenues that are available? Are there any blueprints that are available to us in terms of trying to dismantle this Zionist machine?
So I go back to a couple of things. I go back to that thing I said earlier about the sense that nothing is enough and everything matters.
Yeah.
And so even the stuff that I am deeply convinced doesn't make much of a difference actually makes a difference. Calling your various elected representatives, do they care? No, but in aggregate they have to keep a tally of these things. Okay. And more than anything, they are worried about their jobs. And if it feels at some point like this is big enough that it might cost them their jobs, I think you're going to see a change. And so even something as simple as that, as calling or writing to your elected representatives, is it going to end the genocide? No. But it's something.
Yeah.
Protesting. Is it going to end the genocide? No, but it works. It does something. It reminds all of these systems of power not only that there is opposition to this, but that opposition is willing to put their bodies on the line. Giving resources to the people doing the work at the front lines, things like the Samir Project, the Gaza Soup Kitchen, Dr. Hassan Abusetta, who goes and does surgery on these children who are part of the largest cohort of child amputees in history. Is that going to end the genocide? No. I think I say somewhere in the book, nobody's ever applauded or donated their way out of a genocide, but it matters.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of it. The other, I think, is trying to reorient ourselves, and so this is certainly something I'm guilty of, away from this notion that politics is a top-down endeavor, which is to say that every 4 years we all get together and see who's running for president and then, put the correct bumper sticker on and hope for the best.
Yes.
In Portland, where I live, the Democratic Socialists have made inroads on city council. And I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about looking in your community and finding out what is the bottom of the hierarchy elected position here. School board, city council, town, whatever, and getting involved such that we are working our way from the bottom up rather than once every 4 years flipping a coin and hoping for the best. I think that's a huge part of it. And then finally, as an overarching thing, I think every individual needs to ask themselves, how troublesome am I willing to be about this? Which is not a question that is unique to the oppression of the Palestinian people. I mean, activists have been asking themselves this question about, for example, climate change. And some have come to the conclusion that the level of troublesome they're going to be is blowing up a pipeline, which comes with very serious consequences. And some have decided they're going to put the right bumper sticker, which, fine, do whatever you want. But I don't think we're in a moment where we can be oblivious as to where we stand on these things. And so the final question I think everybody has to ask themselves as they figure out where on the spectrum of resistance they want to stand, if they want to stand at all, how troublesome am I willing to be?
Yes. Now, I really appreciate John Lewis. I'm not, and he put out these great graphic novels, Walk, and I think from that is where we got the quote "good trouble" and how important it is to get into good trouble, and I love that. How troublesome do you want to be? How much into the good trouble do you want to get? I love that. I completely agree that I think the smaller the elections are, the more your vote matters, and also the more possibility there is to get a candidate who is aligned with working people, who is aligned with undocumented Muslim, trans communities. I also think, for me, when I think about politics needs to be something we do from the bottom up, I also think that we need to rearrange the way that we think about it of voting the right person into office is what we need to do, and that's where we stop. After someone gets voted into office, whether it's the person we agree with or not, I think that we need to start thinking about how do we put pressure on whoever is in office to make the right choices, to to make ethical decisions, because that from my understanding of history, that's what works. You make it impossible for a leader to do anything but the right and moral thing.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. I mean, look, corporations don't vote and then sit back and see what happens. Weapons manufacturers don't vote and then sit back and see what happens. And people shouldn't either, right? I don't have millions of dollars, so I'm not going to get a private meeting with these folks.
Nope.
But I can sure as hell make their lives as annoying as humanly possible. I have that power.
Yeah.
And I think, change is happening. And it is happening despite the fact that there is an immense asymmetry of effort here. If the system works for you, you don't have to think of anything better. You can have a complete imaginative poverty. If you want to imagine something better, now the ceiling is unlimited.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there's so much infighting among activists, right? Maybe I want to tear the entire system down. Maybe you just want to tax billionaires a little bit more. There's all kinds of room for disagreement, and God knows I've run into so many activists over the last year or two who I've thought, boy, you are morally correct. You've got all the correct opinions. I agree with you. I don't ever want to talk to you again. We're just two very different people, and that is fine. You
Yes.
know, like there are certain bedrock principles where if you and I are in agreement on that, I will find some common ground, and I will find a way
Yes.
for us to work. Otherwise, we can work on the same thing separately. I don't care. But this notion of you have to be perfect in every respect for any change to happen, I think is so incredibly detrimental and so much a part of the reason why we're in this place. Because God knows fascists don't think that way.
No, they don't. They don't at all. Yeah, I think what we really need to learn how to do is build from commonalities. Like, we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can splinter off on the very specific ways in which we're different, whether it's our political alignment or, or what schools of thought we came up with, or whether we have been updated on the latest, most politically responsible ways to talk, which it is important to be respectful about the way that you talk to other people. And sometimes someone needs a call in, not a call out, right? Sometimes someone needs a little, needs you to spend that extra minute to be which, has happened to me many times. It used to be, what pronouns do you prefer? Not anymore. What pronouns do you use? It used to be POC, now it's BIPOC, and I appreciate people who are pushing out back against that, of BIPOC is by far not a monolith, right? Any group of people within BIPOC are not a monolith. But we spend so much time thinking about how different we are on the left, and that, I don't know, I feel like it keeps us entrenched in where we are, where we're thinking about the political struggle as being left to right, and it's not left to right, it's up and down. And if we could work on commonalities on the left, I think we could start to bring people in on the right, because the reality is all of us just want to live in dignity, and unfortunately the elites on the rights have been able to fool people into believing pointing fingers outwards as opposed to pointing fingers towards the people who are actually making our lives unlivable.
Yeah. Again, I don't think I could have said it any better than that.
You're so nice. Cool. All right. Since we're technically a literary podcast, let me ask you some literary questions. What have you been reading lately?
I've been all over the place. I recently read Hala Elan's memoir, which just came out, and it's just a sort of... I mean, she's a masterful writer, regardless whether it's poetry, nonfiction, fiction, well, you name it. But this one, especially in terms of how to write more honestly than is perhaps prudent. So honestly that the reader is somewhat shaken and fearful on your behalf about subject matter that is, quite dark. The Hollow Half, by Sarah Aziz is a similar example. Also came out quite recently. Those are two exceptional writers, just exceptional writers. I was in New York, and one of my friends at Penguin Random House, I was in the building, and she was editing this book, and she gave me an advance copy of it. I think it's since come out. I think it came out in the last month or so. It's called Submersed, and I think it's by Matthew Gavin Fink, but I'm horrible with names, so please fact check me on that.
Okay.
But basically, it's this nonfiction account of the personal submersible community. These people who build these mini subs, and want to go down. And it's a weird, it's quite a toxic community in places. And I don't mean just lowercase t toxic. I mean the central sort of storyline. He threads a bunch into this book, but the central storyline is about this guy who became obsessed with building one of these things, became known as this kind of celebrity figure in that community, eventually took a journalist down with him and then killed her while they were down there.
What?
It was this crazy case. The thing about the guy who's writing, this guy, Fink, I believe his name is I think he's a poet by training. And so there are these incredible descriptions of place and movement in the middle of him interviewing just some of the worst people, just some of the most awful. And it was a really fascinating book. It was also not, like, I would have never picked that up myself. Like, I don't know anything about this community. I don't. But that was a fascinating read. And so those three off the top of my head are among the better ones I've read.
Incredible. Yeah, no, I mean, the only way that I know about submersibles is like the one, like, what was it, 2 years ago, where like billionaires died in an instant.
Yeah.
Does he talk about that in the book?
It appears to me that he had no choice but to. Like, I think this book probably like predates that in terms of the research that went into it, but it's just like, I think 99% of people you talk to right now would be like, oh yeah, I know about that. It's the guys who went to land the Titanic on that. I think it was called Ocean Gate or whatever.
Ocean Gate, yes, you are correct. Yeah. You are correct. No, that's, it can be hard to... There's just so many unique things that people are into, and some of them are frustrating and problematic, like flat earthers. But some of them are just like, it's like, okay, yeah, you want to build submersibles and go deep into the ocean. Okay, sure. Like, except then you are murdering people in the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, it should be just like any other nerdy hobby, right?
Yes.
Something about this, and he goes into this in the book, this notion of like, this I don't respect authority, and this is my way of manifesting that, and all of this kind of like, don't tread on meanness, and it's really fascinating. I'm one of those people. I'm not much of an anything enthusiast, but I am an enthusiast. Like, I'm
yes,
people who are into things.
Yes,
and I'm fascinated by people who kind of go really deep into subject matter. So this was really interesting for me, even though I hope never to meet the vast majority of people who are profiled.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. No, I'm the exact same way of like, I have a surface level understanding of a lot of different things, and I deeply appreciate people who have a really deep understanding. I love learning from them. I love hearing them geek out, and yeah, that's just not how my brain works at all. Okay, cool. What about, I would love to know a little bit about, like, what is your writing practice like? Like, it sounds like it can vary depending on what is driving a book, but how have you gotten yourself to write consistently? Because I think that's the main thing that aspiring writers struggle with. And also, like, what are the ways in which you give yourself grace when you don't meet those goals?
Yeah, it's taken me a long time to come to anything resembling a halfway decent conclusion about what you just asked. Because I'm one of those people who is not that guy.
Yeah.
Which is to say that I'm not good at having that sense of grace.
Yes. Why did I even ask that? I know you don't give yourself any grace.
But that's the thing, is that, like, over time you start to think this is actually an escape mechanism for you, because it allows you to preemptively abandon the difficult thing, which is to say, if I can be hard enough on myself, then eventually that switch might flip and I might abandon the project. And no matter how painful being hard on myself is, I know at a conscious or subconscious level that writing the thing is more painful. And so in a way, it's kind of an escape mechanism. And the more I've come to terms with that, the more and also just getting older, I think, the more I've allowed myself to not do that anymore. Cool. I'm not good at, I'm not good at writing, but I'm worse at almost everything else. And I tend to give up very easily when things get difficult. Writing is the only area of my sort of professional existence where when things get difficult, I might throw my little tantrum, but I come back to it. And that's the only reason that I know that this is probably what I should be doing with my life. And so, again, I sort of try to tell myself, like, this is how you ended up in this place. I think every writer brings two things to the work that are more important than anything else.
Yeah.
You bring your sense of care and your sense of attention. By attention, I mean just attention to the tiny details of human mechanics or any other kind of mechanics. Why does the room look this way? What, all these little details that eventually lend a richness to the work. And by care, I mean that these people you put on the page, they have no one else but you. You're all they've got. And so the least you can do is treat them with a level of care. I don't think you can do either of those things, pay attention or act with care, either in the work or in real life, if you are constantly running on empty. Mm-hmm. And so again, I go back to this very Machiavellian notion of, you want the writing to be good? You can't do it and also be punching yourself in the face at all times. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's how I've come to think about it. And, there are many, many days when that entire sort of mental infrastructure falls apart. And those days you just turn around and you go watch a dumb movie or something, and it's fine. But that's how I've come to think about it over the years.
Amazing. No, this is reminding me of... I love to help people, but I hate having to ask for help or receiving help. Like, me and one of my friends are trading labor right now. I provide childcare for her kid, and she is doing handiwork around my house. And I instantly, as soon as she got to my house, started to like try and talk my way out of anything that I was like, well, I could do that actually, just like not being able to do it. And eventually she was like, actually, Maggie, it would be really nice for me if you would give me the opportunity to be caring for you in this moment. I was like, yes, let me hack my brain to be like, yes, it's truly the nicest and caringest thing to let other people be caring for you. And I kind of like, it's different what you're describing, but I love how it's not about giving yourself grace. It's about being like, yes, the hardest, worst thing that I can do to myself is force myself to write right now. And so that's what I'm going to do. Like, that's kind of incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's not healthy, I don't think. And I have very few healthy habits when it comes to my writing practice.
Well, I mean, and yet you still do it. I think, there's so many visions of what a writer is and what they do. And I've really enjoyed having conversations with writers through this project who do things really differently. And there's room for everything. Not every single one of us is going to be a Stephen King, right? Who, has their working hours 9 to 5. There's as many different ways to write as there are writers, and it's okay. Are you a planner or a pantser?
I used to be the latter, and I'm increasingly the former. I find the older I get and the more projects I work on, the more I want to have a kind of superstructure in place before I get to it. But then I found with the second novel that I was doing too much of that. And it sort of started to kill off the serendipity value, which I think more than anything is why I turned to writing. Those moments where something is happening on the page and you're not entirely in control of it. Yeah. They show up fleetingly, once a novel if I'm lucky. And I was throttling that. And so now I'm starting to swing in the other direction. And I'm hoping that, if I make it into my 80s or something, I will find an equilibrium by then of both. Sure. Right now I've swung from pantsing to planning, and now I'm trying to get back a little bit of the pantsing.
Yeah. I love that. What is the scaffolding that you've used for both? Like, clearly you've gone really far to planning. Like, how do you kind of like take that apart a little bit to give yourself some room to play? How do you deconstruct planning a little bit?
Yeah, so the first thing I do on any novel-length project, or project that I think is going to be novel-length, is I open up a Word document on my computer called a Y file. And the Y file is effectively a Word document with 2 questions in it. What are you trying to do, and why? And until I have good answers to both of those, particularly the second question, I don't consider the project viable. So it forces me to sit there and create even the flimsiest sort of official pretext, not only for the work itself, but for my sense of necessity surrounding it. Because, again, like, you could learn to play guitar, right? Like, this is years of your life that you're about to dedicate to something. You could spend that a million different ways. So my why needs to be really strong. I'm not the kind of writer who's talented enough to just write about anything for any reason. I need a strong sense of necessity. So that's my entry point, and then from there I create a free-form notes file that I deliberately leave without any context. Mm-hmm. And for years, literally years, I mean, this project that I'm working on right now, this is 8 years now that this notes file has been open. And there's nothing in it except notes, like there's no rhyme or reason. And it might be scene descriptions, chapter outlines, lines of dialogue that I think a character should say, words that I like that sound good. And it's so
awesome.
context-free that sometimes I'll go back and I'll have no idea what the hell this actually was relating to.
Right.
And that's my Steam vent for trying to keep that part of it open. And then I'll start building chapter outlines and character charts and things that I can put on big pieces of paper to make myself feel smart when I put them up on the wall. And, there's a sense of accomplishment kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So again, it's this attempt to sort of balance the leaving the door open to serendipity and also having some kind of map when you're wandering the forest without any clue what you're doing. And you can tell when you're going wrong in either direction. And so it's just a matter of trying to balance that out more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. That's that makes a lot of sense to me I think all of us have experiences where we look back and we're like, why did I think that this is important? And I love that. I love that you just have sort of this nebulous cloud of ideas, and some of them might inform you, some of them might not. All right, we're running low on time, so my question to finish this out is, clearly I really planned this. I guess I would love to know, so you suggested some places to send money if we are hoping to make a difference in Palestine and Gaza right now. What are the other ways in which you are trying to do something that you would encourage other people to join you in to make a difference? And yes, no, actually that's it. Like, what are some things that we can be doing? Like, we're calling our representatives, we're writing them. Are there any other like regional or national groups that we should give our time to?
Oh, I mean, there's certainly, look, and I have my political preferences, and I'm not going to try and sort of force them onto your listeners, right? Like, I could sit here
Fair.
and rave and rant about the Working Families Party or whatever, but I think, to me, there's many organizations that are doing incredible work, everything from, medical aid for Palestinians. There's, at every university almost, there's students who may not even need your sort of overt support. They might need a warm meal or something, right? Like yeah. See how you can be of use to these folks because they're going through it. There are people who are quite literally paying with their lives for getting news out from a part of the world that is essentially just a killing field now. And if you can't support them directly, you can amplify their voices. One of the central sort of asymmetries of power that we have in this situation is that when certain groups do the killing, it is an atrocity and the killers are named and it's stated directly, and when other groups do the killing, it's as though the dead just sort of walked out of a scene. Yeah. And there's all kinds of hedging and so on and so forth. And so to simply amplify the voices of the people who are most impacted by this, I think is in of itself definitely worthwhile. But in a more overarching sense, I mean, whenever I talk to people who have been sort of putting their bodies, their livelihoods on the line, yes, there's frustration and there's immense anger and there's immense risk. But there's also this sense of finally having found community. We live under systems of perpetual taking. Colonialism is a system of perpetual taking. Capitalism is a system of perpetual taking. And you are conditioned from the earliest moment to play nice with these systems, or else they will turn on you. And that is a very lonely way of being in the world. And then suddenly you end up in an encampment with a bunch of people, and people are like sharing meals and simply being decent and human to one another. My advice is to seek that out where you can, because we have precious little of that, and it is rejuvenating. Activism done in perpetuity with no break, with no sense of just rejuvenation is crushing. I saw this in the Arab Spring. You see this in every movement, right? So seek that out. Find those communities. And then finally, when inevitably somebody says something or behaves in a way that takes for granted that certain groups of people are subhuman, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
This is a debate that we have all of the time, right? You go to Thanksgiving dinner and your uncle says something about trans folks. Do you keep your head down and just let the evening pass nicely? Or is it important enough to you to say something?
Yeah.
Make a decision about that. Because that is the most immediate and direct and frequent exercise of whatever privilege you may have. There's other stuff that will have much bigger effect, but this happens 1,000,000 times a day, every day.
Definitely. One of the things that you said about how do we find joy as we are part of these movements. The first bite-sized episode that we're putting out is a conversation with Hinton's first author, Reagan E.J. Jackson, and that's a huge part of what she talks about, actually, is that, to keep going, you need joy, but also, if we hopefully get to the other side of this oppressive world that we live in, how will we know how to live differently? And so I love that. And also, what are some of the things that you are doing to care for yourself and to experience joy as you continue to do the important work?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm trying my best to spend time with people I care about.
Yeah. And
to spend time with people around whom I don't have to change some facet of myself. I've been to some really, really nice dinner parties where I was treated really, really well, and the food was great, and the location was fantastic, and all of these people could have really helped my career, and then afterwards you come home and you kind of want to take a cold shower. Or, just there's that sense of just what? And I'm trying to do less of that. Generally speaking, one of the things that has brought me a lot of joy recently is saying no to stuff.
I love that for you.
And, it's not great for the career and the rest of it. I've had this very recently. In fact, right now as we speak, I'm going through this health thing that has sort of forced me to say no to a lot of stuff. And so, for example, all of my events in August I've canceled. And at first I thought, man, I'm letting so many of my agents and editors and publishers down. And it's true, I probably am. They have to deal with the fallout from that. But there was something so cathartic about that. I found that early on in my career, the biggest regret was always not saying yes to something. And now the biggest regret overwhelmingly is saying yes to the wrong thing. And so I found that is doubly rejuvenating. First, it allows me to not do the thing, that I really deep down don't want to do. But also it gives me my time back.
Yeah.
And so I'm writing for the first time, literally today, this morning.
Amazing. Wow.
And actually wrote something. And that's all I've ever wanted to do with my life. And so, those are the places for me personally, but I think this is a very different answer you're going to get from different writers.
Of course. And I think, again, that's what's important, is that there's different ways to get joy. And as someone who has a hard time saying no to things, I aspire to get to the place where you're at right now. hopefully without having a health crisis, but at least we can be grateful for that piece of it, that it forces you to take a step back.
Yeah, I think so.
Amazing. All right. Thank you so much for coming back to talk to me again. I really appreciate you as a person. I really appreciate your writing. And I'm in the struggle with you, and I thank you for what you do. And if we can all do as much as we can, I think we can survive this, and I think we can help others survive this.
I agree. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to speak with you.
That's so nice.